The cold morning light over northern France in the late weeks of 1944 had a pale metallic quality, as if the sun itself was struggling to warm a continent still fractured by violence. At the forward airstrip near Saint-Trond, the ground crews had been working since the deep hours before dawn, breathing steam into the winter air as they loaded belts of half-inch ammunition into the wings of the big Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Frost clung to the olive drab skins, so thin it cracked under a man's thumbprint. Fuel trucks groaned along the matting as pilots walked toward their aircraft in the slow, routine steps of men who had learned to accept fear by refusing to move quickly enough for it to catch them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. First Lieutenant Daniel Mercer paused before his jug, feeling the familiar weight in his chest as he uncinched his sheepskin jacket and ran a glove along the edge of a cowling panel. The Thunderbolt's Pratt and Whitney double wasp was a dark, slumbering animal at this hour. In a few minutes, it would shake itself awake with a roar that could drown out thoughts. But for the moment, the plane was inert, a mass of steel and aluminum held together by bolts, welds, and stubbornness. Mercer liked it better this way. The quiet moments before a mission were when he remembered that the aircraft did not hate him, nor judge him, nor care whether he lived or died. It simply did what it could do, and he did what he could do. And in the spaces where the two aligned, survival was found. The briefing had been short and clinical, like everything in those winter months after the Ardennes erupted into chaos. Intelligence units were scrambling, weather remained treacherous, and German fighters, though fewer, were still bold enough to challenge Allied positions with savage surprise. Mercer's squadron, part of the 9th Air Force's sprawling tactical web, had been assigned a sweep over a contested region near the Rhine. The map table still held the faint smell of damp wool and pencil shavings from the anxious hands that traced lines across it every morning. The Germans were trying to move fuel and men through pockets of forest that remained under their control. Allied columns were pushing back in slow, grinding steps. The task for the jug pilots was simple: fly high, prowl deep, find anything with iron tracks or wings, and kill it. Mercer climbed the ladder and slid into the cockpit, the canopy rails cold through his gloves. He strapped in, feeling the rough webbing of the shoulder harness bite down over the sheepskin. Ground crew pulled the chocks clear. When he hit the starter, the double wasp coughed twice, belched a cloud of blue smoke that curled in the frigid air, then caught with a violent shudder. The whole plane trembled as the cylinders aligned in rhythm. The gauges quivered, the needles danced toward their marks. Heat seeped through the rudder pedals slowly, like blood returning to numbed limbs. Taxiing out, Mercer could see the other Thunderbolts forming up, their propeller discs flashing with silver crescents as they turned into the rising sun. Men he had eaten with, joked with, quietly mourned with. Men who, at any moment, might vanish from the sky in a smear of vapor and fire. He tried not to look too long at any one plane. Attachment felt fragile in a war that turned friendships into ghosts before a man had the chance to feel their loss fully. They lifted off in a staggered trail, wheels clattering against the matting, each jug climbing into the biting air that stung eyes even through goggles. At 12,000 feet, the world flattened into sheets of white cloud and distant hills. Radio chatter remained minimal, clipped, and professional. Mercer felt the day settle into its familiar tension, a frame of quiet readiness in which the sky was both vast and claustrophobic. For nearly an hour, the flight droned eastward, engines pushing them across a land still scarred by months of retreat and advance. Smoke from distant artillery drifted upward in greasy columns. Rivers curved like dark spine markings across the snow. The war had an almost serene appearance from up high, a cruel trick that Mercer never fully got used to. Violence rarely looked violent from altitude. It looked like weather. At 19,000 feet near the target area, the flight leader signaled a wide spread. Pairs of Thunderbolts drifted apart, each assigned its own patch of sky. Mercer flew slightly behind and above his wingman, Lieutenant Harris, a quiet, steady fellow from Nebraska who had a habit of tapping the throttle with 2 fingers when he was nervous. The tap, tap, tap of that gloved hand was visible even through the thick canopy. It reminded Mercer that fear in the cockpit was not the enemy. Panic was. Fear kept a pilot alert. Panic got him wrapped in his own parachute harness or tumbling into a forest in burning metal. Clouds gathered below them in slow, rolling columns. Sunlight refracted across the frost at the canopy edge. Everything about the moment felt balanced, neither peaceful nor hostile. The Germans had been cautious lately. The Luftwaffe's fuel shortages were so severe that many pilots were grounded not because the enemy threatened them, but because their own supply lines were starved of gasoline. And yet, every so often, the sky would erupt with an attack by Focke-Wulfs, diving with lethal confidence, their radial engines howling as they tore downward through Allied formations like arrows loosed from invisible strings. Mercer had learned never to rely on assumptions about German weakness. Desperate men fought hard. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a mild tremor through the control stick. He frowned, rolling slightly to test authority. The jug responded, but sluggishly. It felt as if the plane were moving through mud. He checked the hydraulics gauge. The pressure needle was fading, bobbing like a dying fish. He tapped the glass. No change. He keyed his mic. Red 2, checking hydraulics. I've got pressure dropping. Harris's voice crackled through the headset. How bad? Bad enough. He tested the flaps. Slow, uneven. He tried the gear lever. Nothing. The handle felt light, disconnected, as though it were nothing but an ornament bolted to the panel. A sour taste filled his mouth. Hydraulics meant flaps, gear, much of the control authority. No hydraulics meant the plane would not land in any normal way, if it landed at all. He steadied his breathing. Panic tried to claw up his spine. He forced it back down. More pilots were lost to their own minds than to enemy fire. He needed clarity, not dread. He glanced at the map, clipped to his kneeboard. They were far from friendly territory, and even if he could coax the ship home, he would still have to figure out how to bring down a jug with dead hydraulics, something he had trained for only in theory and practiced in short, controlled exercises on long runways. The real thing was far less forgiving. Red 2, Harris said quietly. You want to head back? Mercer hesitated. They were deep into enemy territory, and turning back alone could be suicide if German fighters were lurking. Still, limping forward with crippled hydraulics was hardly wise. Then Harris's voice returned. Sharper. Contact, 10 o'clock low. Climbing. Mercer snapped his head left. At first he saw nothing but glare. Then the shapes materialized, sleek, long-nosed, angular silhouettes, cutting upward with predatory certainty. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, at least 5 of them. The German pilots had likely been hiding under the cloud deck, waiting for the Thunderbolts to commit to their spread. Now, having spotted a pair drifting slightly apart, they rose for the kill. The American flight leader barked orders over the radio, his voice a sharp metronome of discipline. Mercer and Harris rolled into a defensive weave. The FW-190 was smaller, more agile than the Jug, with blistering roll rates and a punch of cannon fire that could dismember a fighter in a heartbeat. But the P-47 had its own virtues: strength, weight, durability, and 8 half-inch Brownings that could chew a man's aircraft apart in a few seconds of accurate fire. Hydraulics or no hydraulics, Mercer was now in a fight. He couldn't escape. The first German burst slashed across the sky, a streak of white tracers stitching upward. Mercer pushed the stick forward to dive, but it resisted. Heavy as a balking mule, he managed to force the nose down, and the Jug dropped wingtips, shuddering. Harris snapped into a tight turn, firing a burst that forced one German fighter to break away. The other 4 pressed on. Wind screamed across the canopy. Mercer's engine roared as he shoved the throttle to the wall. The double Wasp responded with a deep growl. surging forward. He felt its strength, its huge, stubborn heart trying to save them both. For a moment, he forgot the missing hydraulics. The jug was built to take punishment. He would give it the chance. A Focke-Wulf slid behind him, close enough that Mercer could see the pilot's goggles. The German fired, cannon rounds ripping through the air. Mercer rolled hard right, the ailerons groaning under the strain, and the rounds passed by in orange streaks. A second German dove across his path, trying to box him in. Mercer fired a long burst. The tracers reached out, snapping along the German fuselage. The Focke-Wulf jerked away, smoke trailing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sky had become a whirling cage, every movement steeped in risk. Mercer's breath fogged inside his mask, sweat trickled despite the cold. Each pilot fought in violent arcs, the Thunderbolts using weight and power, the Germans using finesse and angles. Then the universe seemed to shrink to a pinhole as one FW-190 swept across his nose from right to left, climbing slightly. The German moved with the confidence of a man who believed he had the advantage, who believed the jug was clumsy, who believed the Allied pilot was already scared and half-broken. Mercer saw him commit to the curve, saw the moment his silhouette lined up with the jug's nose. Mercer squeezed the trigger. The 8 Brownings erupted in a single brute chorus, so violent that the stick trembled in his hands. Tracers leapt across the short distance. The German tried to roll, but the burst had already found its mark. Fire blossomed along the wing route. The Focke-Wulf keeled over and began to fall, flames licking across its fuselage. Mercer saw the canopy jettison, saw a figure emerge, tumbling. There was no time to process the kill. Another German was diving. Mercer twisted the jug hard, nearly blacking out. His limbs strained under the pressure, the German overshot by inches, streaking past in a blur. Mercer snapped the jug's nose around, firing another burst. The rounds struck the FW-190's tail, shredding fabric and aluminum. The fighter wobbled, then plunged downward, trailing smoke. 2. He felt a rising sense of disbelief, not triumph. Just the surreal reality of survival pressing outward from the edges of panic. In the distance, he saw the other Thunderbolts engaging, saw smoke spiraling from one aircraft that might have been Harris's, or might not have. He could not think about that now. Another German latched onto his tail. Mercer rolled into a steep dive, engines screaming, airframe buffeting from the speed. The German followed, cannon rounds slicing past. Mercer felt the jug, pushing the edge of what it could handle. The wind tore at the control surfaces. The whole plane threatened to shake apart. He held the dive until the trees below rose like green knives. Then he pulled up. The German pilot reacted a heartbeat too late. The Focke-Wulf overshot, climbing desperately, exposing his belly. Mercer fired. The burst struck square across the underside. The fighter jerked, then exploded in a flash of fire that lit the winter sky. 3. Climbing hard, breath ragged, he scanned for threats. A shape flickered to his right. Another German, circling, trying to find an angle. Mercer rolled, fired, missed, rolled again, felt the jug groan with each movement. The FW-190 tried to climb above him for a high-side pass. Mercer shoved the throttle forward, lifting the nose just enough to cross the German's lead. He fired a quick, disciplined burst. The German fighter shuddered, wavered, then snapped into a spin, trailing smoke. Mercer watched it tumble until the tree line swallowed it. 4. He was shaking now, whether from adrenaline, cold, or shock. He wasn't sure. The sky felt eerily quiet. Had minutes passed? Seconds? The radio hissed with broken transmissions. He looked for Harris. Nothing. Then, from above, the last German dove. A perfect attack line. Perfect, except for one thing. The jug was still alive. Mercer rolled, dove, felt the ailerons. Barely respond. He saw the German adjust, trying to anticipate his move. Mercer yanked the throttle back, letting the jug momentarily hang in the air like a stone. The German shot past, surprised, overshooting by yards. In that fleeting instant, Mercer fired. The burst ripped across the German fuselage. The fighter burst into flame, spiraling downward. 5. And then, suddenly, the sky was empty, silent except for the thrum of his wounded aircraft. His hands trembled, his heart hammered. He tried the gear lever again out of reflex. Still dead. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving the cold reality. He had survived the Germans, but he still had to survive the landing. And the Jug, big, wounded, hydraulics gone, seemed to be waiting in quiet, indifferent patience to see what he could do next. Morning arrived reluctantly, as if even the sun hesitated to touch the battered airfield where yesterday's ghosts still clung to the frost. A cold mist rolled low along the taxiways, sliding around the hulking silhouettes of the Thunderbolts as though war itself were exhaling. Engines coughed awake in distant corners, but for the most part the base was quiet. Too quiet for men who had witnessed something unbelievable just hours before. Captain Walker didn't sleep. His cot sat untouched in the corner of the briefing hut, the blanket still folded with mechanical neatness. Instead, he had drifted through the night like a restless spirit, checking the maintenance crew's progress, hovering over the disassembled hydraulic system, replaying every second of his fight against the FW-190s. He remembered the vibration in the stick, the weight of the gear refusing to fall, the sickening drop in altitude, and the pure, impossible fury with which he had forced the plane to obey. He remembered the flash of tracers from the first Focke-Wulf that dove past his canopy. He remembered the last one, spiraling into the forest like a burning comet. What he could not remember, what he refused to admit, was fear. By dawn, he stood outside his Thunderbolt again, watching the ground crew finish the last checks. Frost crackled under their boots. One mechanic, a lanky 19-year-old with a perpetual smirk, rubbed grease from his fingertips and glanced at Walker. "Sir," he muttered, almost shy. We heard the story." Walker kept his eyes on the engine, cowling. "Most of it's exaggerated." The kid shook his head. "Doesn't sound exaggerated." The crew didn't ask questions. They didn't have to. Every man on base had heard the German radio chatter intercepted that evening, panicked voices describing a single American fighter that did not break, did not flee, did not die. A Jug, flying with its gear partly down, shedding smoke, yet tearing through a formation like an angry god. The Luftwaffe had named him already, Der verrückte Donner, the Mad Thunder. Walker pretended he didn't care. But the name settled somewhere inside him, electric and cold. Footsteps crunched across the frozen gravel behind him. "You look like you've been awake since 1941, Lieutenant Hale murmured. Walker didn't turn. "Got a lot on my mind." Hale studied him quietly. In daylight, the bruising around Walker's knuckles looked worse, like dried berries embedded in skin. "You know," Hale said softly, "no one expects you to fly today." "That's good," Walker replied, "because I'm flying anyway." Hale exhaled sharply, something between disbelief and admiration. "You're insane." Walker gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's what the Germans said." They walked toward the briefing hut, where pilots gathered around a smudged chalkboard. Captain Arnold, still nursing the shock of the previous day, rubbed his temple as he explained the new patrol assignments. His voice carried a restless undertone, part pride, part fear of losing more men. When Walker stepped inside, the chatter died. Heads turned, some pilots straightened unconsciously. A few looked at him, the way men look at a survivor who walked out of a burning building while everyone else perished inside. Arnold cleared his throat. "Captain Walker, glad to see you're still on your feet." Walker nodded. "Let's get to work." A murmur rippled through the room. One pilot muttered, "Damn right," under his breath. Arnold tapped the chalkboard. "All right, listen up. Luftwaffe activity's been increasing near the Harz Mountains. Recon reports a new staffel of 190s operating out of Wernigerode. They're fast, aggressive, and not afraid to push altitude limits. Command wants us sweeping ahead of the bomb groups." Walker leaned against the back wall, arms crossed. Altitude, 25,000. Perfect, Arnold hesitated. Walker, maybe sit this one out. Just today. The room froze. Walker stepped forward slowly, the way a man approaches a podium with something heavy to say. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm. If I sit out, he said, they'll think yesterday scared me. They'll think that just because a system failed, I failed, and I didn't. Arnold opened his mouth, but Walker continued. The Germans think we break under pressure. They think the P-47 is too heavy, too slow to climb, too clumsy to fight at altitude. They think a pilot who loses hydraulics is dead in the sky. And they're wrong on every count. He walked past the other pilots, his boots thumping quietly on the wooden floor. Yesterday wasn't luck. It was the jug being the jug, and I'm not about to let the Luftwaffe rewrite that story. Silence settled, firm and unanimous. Arnold closed the briefing folder with a resigned slap. Fine, you're on red flight. Walker nodded once. Good. Outside, engines began to roar awake. The familiar mechanical thunder vibrated through the ground, through boots, through ribs. Steam shivered off exhaust stacks in pale white spirals. The smell of cold oil, avgas, and metal filled the air, sharp enough to taste. Walker climbed into his cockpit with more care than usual. The seat straps felt stiff in the morning cold, and the metal floor chilled through his boots. He scanned the instruments. Hydraulic pressure, perfect this time. A silent promise. The manual gear crank remained folded beside his knee, a reminder of everything he had survived. Hale taxied up beside him, wagging his wings. Walker smirked and returned the gesture. When the tower cleared them, the Thunderbolts surged forward together, massive, roaring beasts, shaking frost from their wings as they accelerated. Walker felt his pulse synchronize with the vibrations of the engine. As he lifted off the runway, the world fell away beneath him like a discarded shell. Within minutes, they climbed through a layer of pale clouds that swallowed sound. The sunlight above was blinding, brutal, golden. The P-47s cut clean arcs into the sky, contrails trailing behind them like frozen ropes. At altitude, the world became a quiet, distant planet. The only sound was the steady thrum of the engine and the faint creak of metal expanding in the cold. Red flight formed up, 4 Thunderbolts in a loose echelon. Hale broke the silence. Sky's too calm, he muttered. Walker nodded. Calm skies make pilots sloppy. Not today. For nearly half an hour, they swept the expanse above Wernigerode. Below, winter forests looked like spilled ink. Rivers wound like silver threads between snow-blanketed hills. It was a perfect view. Too perfect. Walker's instincts prickled. Then he saw it. A speck at 2 o'clock. Then 2 more. Then an entire line of dark flecks forming a predatory arc. Bandits, Walker said. 11 o'clock high. Looks like... He didn't finish. The sun flashed across the leading aircraft's wings, revealing the unmistakable wide-bladed prop, the angular silhouette, the swaggering stance. FW Wonder 90s, at least 12 of them. Hale hissed through his teeth. They're diving. Fast. Walker's voice dropped an octave, calm as a man welcoming a storm. Red flight. Hold formation. Climb 200 feet. You want altitude against them? Hale asked, incredulous. Not altitude, Walker said. Their angle. The 190s were coming in too steep, too eager. Walker could feel it. The subtle arrogance in their approach. They thought they were closing in on slow prey. At the perfect moment, he snapped the stick right and pitched upward. Brake now! The Thunderbolts burst apart like steel fireworks. Tracers sliced through the space they had occupied seconds before. The Luftwaffe attack overshot in a chaotic streak of momentum. Walker rolled inverted, eyes narrowing. Too steep, boys. Too fast. Let's take advantage. Red flight curved into a defensive spiral, forcing the Germans to correct, to chase, to bleed energy. Walker dove underneath the nearest 190, using the jug's weight like a sledgehammer. The airframe groaned as he pulled back on the stick, lining up an impossible shot directly into the sun glare. The tracers found their mark. The first Fokker-Wulf disintegrated in a blossom of flame. Hale's voice cracked over the radio. "You're doing it again, Walker. Jesus, you're doing it again." But Walker heard something else in Hale's voice. Not fear. Belief. 2 more 190s cut across his tail. He pushed throttle to the stop. The jug roared so violently he felt the vibration through his teeth. The Germans expected the P-47 to climb poorly at this altitude. They expected it to wallow, to lose breath. They expected wrong. The Thunderbolts surged upward like it had been insulted. Walker snapped into a hammerhead turn, dropping down behind the pursuing fighters. "2 on your 6, Hale warned. "I see them." He didn't just see them, he felt them. Every instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. The fight was a moving puzzle, and the jug's weight, its momentum, its stubborn mass, all became his weapons. He used the dive to gain speed, then swung upward again, forcing the 190s into another steep correction. Another mistake, another kill. The Fokker-Wulf spiraled down, smoke trailing like a torn ribbon. "3, Hale shouted. "That's 3, Walker." But Walker wasn't counting. The Germans regrouped, now aware they were facing something or someone far more dangerous than expected. They formed into a disciplined line, circling for another coordinated attack. Walker steadied his breath. Frost formed on the inside of his mask. His knuckles tightened around the stick. "Red flight," he said quietly. "Let's end this." They dove together, 4 Thunderbolts, against surviving German machines. In the tangle of arcs, dives, rolls, and screaming turns, the sky became a furious tapestry of metal and fire. Walker's eyes locked on movement, not shapes. Intent, not wings. A 190 pulled too sharp. Walker snapped behind him and fired. 4. Another tried to climb out of reach. Walker chased through the sun-blind glare. 5. The remaining Germans fled toward the mountains, engines howling in retreat. Hale whooped into the radio. "They're running! By God, they're running from us!" But Walker's breathing was steady, focused. He had no triumph to spare, only a strange, quiet clarity, a knowledge that something inside him had shifted forever. As the Thunderbolts formed up for the flight home, Hale spoke again, softer now. "Walker, you know they're talking about you, right? The other squadrons, even command. They say you're the one pilot the Luftwaffe fears." Walker looked at the horizon, where the retreating enemy specks vanished into blue haze. "I don't want them to fear me," he said finally. Hale paused. "Then what do you want?" Walker exhaled. "To finish this war alive." The jug hummed beneath him, steady as a heartbeat. The airfield waited below, a scatter of tents and runways etched against winter earth. Walker guided his P-47 into a slow descent, watching the world rise to meet him. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel invincible. He only felt done. For now. But deep inside, he sensed something else gathering on the horizon, something bigger than one dogfight or one miracle landing, something the war had been building toward. And when it came, he would be ready. The snow arrived that night. Not a gentle drift, but a relentless, wind-whipped curtain that came in sideways and turned the airfield into a half-frozen wasteland. The wind moaned through the hangar rafters, rattling loose panels with hollow metallic clatter. Heavy flakes gathered in the corners of tents, along the fuselages of grounded aircraft, across the shoulders of mechanics who refused to stop working. The war didn't pause for weather. Neither did the men who lived inside it. Inside the operations hut, the pot-bellied stove glowed orange, its heat fighting a losing battle against the drafts that seeped through the walls. Men huddled around warped tables, boots steaming, gloves drying on the stove's battered surface. But the warmth wasn't what held everyone inside. It was the briefing the colonel had called. Unannounced, urgent, and at an hour far too late to bode well. Captain Walker sat in the back, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the frost forming along the window frame. He'd barely removed his flight jacket before being called in, and his sleeves still smelled faintly of engine oil and cordite. His knuckles throbbed again, old pain flaring like an ember every time the temperature dropped. Hale leaned toward him and whispered, "If this is about what you did today, maybe they're finally promoting you." Walker didn't smile. Command doesn't hand out promotions at midnight. The door banged open violently as Colonel Whitford strode in, snow clinging to the brim of his cap. He slammed the door behind him, stomped the ice off his boots, and went straight to the map spread across the front table. "All right. Listen up," Whitford growled, the weariness in his voice doing nothing to blunt the steel underneath. 15th Army Group has intercepted intelligence that the Luftwaffe is preparing a counteroffensive, not just local raids, not just harassment. Something coordinated, something big. A ripple passed through the room. Tightening jaws, straightened backs, Whitford jabbed a finger toward a marked region east of the Harz Mountains. They're moving reinforcements to Wernigerode, fuel trucks, ammunition convoys, additional fighter groups, maybe more. This isn't random. This is a build-up. Walker felt it in his chest. A weight, a pull, a familiar dread. "Over the next 72 hours, Whitford continued, "we're going to starve them. Every supply line they're building, every truck they send, every new aircraft they can't get into the air fast enough, you're going to tear it apart." Hale muttered, "We barely scraped through today." Whitford heard him. "And tomorrow, Lieutenant Hale, you'll scrape harder, because if we don't shut this down, the bastards will hit our bombers like they've never hit them before." Walker straightened, feeling every pilot's eyes shift toward him. Whitford set the pointer aside. "One more thing. The Germans, they're aware of a particular thorn in their side." A few men chuckled nervously. Whitford's gaze landed on Walker. "Captain, they're talking about you by name now." Walker stayed still, expression unreadable. "Intercepted chatter," Whitford went on. "They call you their priority nuisance. Some even claim you're flying with experimental modifications. Others say you're two pilots. The most creative rumor claims you're—" He paused, smirking. "Not entirely human." Quiet laughter rippled through the room. Whitford didn't smile back. "Make no mistake, it means they'll be hunting you." Walker finally spoke, voice low. "They already were." "Not like this," Whitford replied. The stove hissed, snow scratched at the windows like brittle fingers. The tension coiled tighter and tighter until Whitford dismissed the briefing. Men rose slowly, gathering jackets, helmets, gloves, each expression carrying the weight of what the next days would demand. As Walker stood, Whitford placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Walk with me." They stepped into the storm. The gusts slapped their faces, stinging their eyes. Floodlights cast shaking cones of brightness across the snow-swirled darkness. Whitford lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind. "You know I admire what you did. Hell, everyone does. But I need to know something plainly." Walker waited. "Can you keep doing it?" Whitford asked. "Can you keep pushing like that without breaking?" Walker thought of the 5 Focke-Wulfs he'd downed that morning. The climb, the dive, the moment when his vision tunneled and his breath froze in his mask. The moment he knew he was no longer flying the jug so much as wrestling it into submission. "Sir," Walker said carefully, "I don't think I can do what I did today again." Whitford lowered the cigarette. But I can do something better." The colonel exhaled smoke, watching it vanish in the wind. That's what I needed to hear. The storm intensified. Snow whipped sideways as if trying to claw the airfield from the earth. Whitford crushed the cigarette under his boot and trudged away, leaving Walker alone in the wind. Walker turned his gaze toward the row of sleeping Thunderbolts. Massive, snow-coated shapes hunched against the night like patient metal giants. Shadow swallowed their wings. Ice clung to their propellers. They looked cold, just like he felt. He didn't go to his quarters. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he made his way to the maintenance hangar. Inside, lanterns and work lamps cast warm halos across the floor, revealing the familiar busy ballet of mechanics tinkering with engines, cleaning barrels, patching bullet holes. The smell of kerosene and solvent felt grounding. Real. Human. Sergeant Weller, the oldest mechanic by at least a decade, straightened when he saw Walker lingering in the doorway. "Couldn't keep yourself away, huh?" Weller chuckled. His face was weather-beaten, his beard speckled with frost. Walker shrugged. "Jug won't be ready without you." "She will," Weller said with pride. "Never doubt that." Walker approached the Thunderbolt's exposed engine, its cylinders glistening with fresh oil. "What do you think she needs?" Weller's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Honestly, she needs what you need." Walker frowned. "And what's that?" "Rest," Weller said. Walker's jaw tensed. "And not an option." Weller studied him for a long moment, softening slightly. "Then at least tell me something true. What's driving you so damn hard, eh?" The question hit deeper than Walker expected. He ran a finger along the curve of the engine cowling. Cold metal. Unforgiving. But dependable. "I grew up thinking war was a straight line," Walker said slowly. "Win enough fights, live through enough missions, and you get to go home. But now," his voice tightened, "now I feel like every fight just leads to another one, and another, and every time I come back alive, the war asks if I'm willing to gamble again." Weller pulled a wrench from his belt, set it aside, and leaned his elbows on the Jug's fuselage. "And you're afraid someday the war won't ask, it'll just take." Walker's silence was answer enough. Weller clapped his shoulder. A fatherly gesture. Brief but steady. "Listen, you don't beat this war by surviving every fight. You beat it by making damn sure the next kid doesn't have to." Walker nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. A shout from outside broke the moment. Two runners burst through the hangar doors, breath freezing in clouds around their faces. "Captain Walker," one yelled. "Immediate launch order. Scramble in 10. Everything froze. Weller, the mechanics, the air itself. Walker blinked. "In this storm." "There's a German recon flight approaching the perimeter," the runner blurted. "Possibly more behind them. They want you up now." Weller shook his head in disbelief. "Madness." But Walker was already moving. He ran into the storm, boots skidding on ice, wind tearing at his jacket. The snow stung like gravel. Mechanics scrambled behind him, pulling chocks, rolling fuel drums, shouting to one another over the gale. Hale sprinted toward him from the opposite side of the runway, scarf whipping wildly. "This is insanity!" "No!" Walker shouted back. "This is war!" The two men climbed into their Thunderbolts, shaking snow from the canopies. Engines coughed, sputtered, then roared alive, giant propellers shredding the air into a frenzy of white spirals. Tower crackled through the radio. "Red flight, you are cleared for takeoff. Repeat, cleared for takeoff. Enemy bogies inbound at high speed." Walker opened the throttle. The Jug lurched forward, wheels carving twin scars through the snow-covered runway. Wind slammed against the fuselage. Visibility was a nightmare. Ghost shapes, spinning vortices, flashing lights. But Walker didn't hesitate. The Jug could handle the storm. He could handle the storm. And somewhere up there, slicing through the night like a blade, the enemy was already hunting him. The Thunderbolt lifted off, shuddering, growling, defiant, and vanished into the blizzard as if swallowed by the sky. The hunt had begun again, and this time it wasn't clear who was hunting whom. The sun was only a pale suggestion on the horizon when Walker woke to the sound of distant engines, low, rolling like a storm, forming somewhere just out of sight. For a moment he thought it was memory, the echo of the day before, but then he heard the clatter of tools, the murmur of crew chiefs, and the unmistakable cough of a Pratt and Whitney warming up. The 353rd was already moving. He sat up, slowly, stiff-backed, feeling every mile flown, every maneuver etched in the bruised muscles beneath his flight jacket. His cot creaked. The tent around him glowed faintly as dawn seeped through the canvas. Mac was already gone, his boots missing from beside his cot, his flight gear stripped from the hook. Good. Walker preferred not to speak before missions. Words had weight, and in the cold hours before takeoff, that weight hung heavier than most could bear. He stepped outside into crisp morning air and walked toward the line of Thunderbolts, waiting like steel beasts shaking off frost, their wings wide and hungry. Ground crews circled them with practiced urgency. Every man worked differently in the morning. Some silent, some joking, some muttering prayers, but all with the same restless energy. Today's sortie wasn't just another escort job. Intelligence had come down last night. The Luftwaffe was preparing a large push, a coordinated attempt to strike at the bombers with numbers they hadn't fielded in months. The 353rd would be among the first to meet them. Walker approached his P-47. Fresh patches covered yesterday's damage. The cowling gleamed under a thin coat of dew. Brower, his crew chief, turned when he heard Walker's footsteps. "Morning, Captain," Brower said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's fueled, armed, and mean. Try not to break her today." Walker gave a faint smirk. "No promises." Brower nodded at the patched panel. "Hydraulics are better than new. You could probably land her with one wing missing." "You're not inspiring confidence." "You don't need confidence. You just need altitude and ammo." Walker laughed under his breath and climbed the ladder. The metal was cold under his gloves. As he settled into the cockpit, the seat felt familiar and foreign, all at once, like returning to a home that wasn't his, but had kept him alive. He ran his hands along the controls, throttle, rudder pedals, trim wheels, each one a friend, each one a promise. Mac radioed from across the line as engines began to turn over. "You alive, boss?" "For now. Good. Let's try to stay that way for another day." Walker glanced toward Mac's Thunderbolt. The man was already buckled in, helmet on, goggles down. Ready. Reliable. A strange comfort in a world where nothing stayed whole for long. The squadron lifted into the sky as the sun finally tore free of the horizon, the world beneath them shifting from grey to gold. Clouds formed scattered stacks across the morning, their tops glowing like embers. The air was smooth at first, the kind of deceptive calm that always made Walker uneasy. They met the bombers an hour later, an enormous formation crawling steadily toward their target. Sunlight flashed off hundreds of wings. The P-47s slid into escort positions, tightening the defensive net. Mac whistled through the radio. "Looks like a parade." "Let's hope no one brings fireworks," Walker replied. But someone always did. The radar report came 20 minutes later. Multiple German groups inbound, fast and high. Walker felt the tension coil inside him, a wire drawn too tight. He scanned the sky through his canopy, eyes flicking from left to right, up to the glare-drenched sun, back down to the cloud deck. Then he saw them. Dark specks at first, then shapes, sleek, sharp-winged, descending with predatory precision. FW-190s and BF-109s, hundreds of them, sunlight glinting off canopies as they fanned out like a swarm. "All flights, tighten up," Walker ordered calmly. "We've got company." The Luftwaffe fell upon the formation in coordinated waves, disciplined and furious. Tracers slashed the sky. The bombers tightened their boxes. Thunderbolts peeled off to intercept. Walker slammed his throttle forward and climbed into the attack. His P-47 roared up into the sun, the engine vibrating through his bones. He broke through the glare, spotted a 190 diving for the bombers, and rolled inverted, dropping behind it. The German pilot never saw him. Walker fired a controlled burst. The 50 cals chewed through the fighter's fuselage, ripping the tail away. The 190 tumbled, smoke spinning off it like ribbon, disappearing into cloud. "Splash one," Walker muttered. Above him, two more fighters tangled, Mac and a pair of 109s, twisting through tight vertical spirals. Walker pulled up, firing a long-range burst to break the enemy's line. One 109 flinched, pulling wide, giving Mac the opening to finish the other. But the fight didn't slow. More Germans poured in. The sky became a living battlefield, planes crossing paths by inches, shells streaking past canopies, explosions blooming in violent blossoms. Walker dove to cover a bomber whose right wing was aflame, a 190 making passes to finish it. He overshot the first run, looped hard, and came down behind the attacker. This one was skilled. He juked left, dropped flaps, tried to force Walker to overshoot. Walker matched him, staying glued to his tail. "Not today," Walker growled. He fired. The 190 jerked, belched smoke, and spiraled away. Then he heard Mac's voice, strained, urgent. "Walker, I've got one on me. I can't—" Walker snapped his head right. Mac's Thunderbolt was trailing smoke. A 109 sat tight on his 6, peppering him with cannon fire. Walker rolled hard and dove, stomach lurching as gravity swallowed him. He lined up the shot, squeezed the trigger. Nothing. His guns jammed, metal clicked, dry and useless. Walker cursed, slammed the charging handle, but the gun stayed silent. Mac's P-47 took another burst. A flame licked from the engine cowling. Mac's voice shook through the radio. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Walker pushed the throttle to the stop, trying to close distance before... Mac's plane lurched, rolled, and began a slow, smoking descent. Walker felt something cold pierce through him. Not fear, but a hollow dread that crackled like static. He stayed on the enemy's tail, powerless, watching the 109 break away as Mac's Thunderbolt spiraled toward the cloud layer. "Mac, bail out!" Walker shouted. "Get out now!" But there was no answer, only static, thin and fragile against the roaring battle. Walker followed the falling plane until it vanished into the clouds below. Then he was alone again, guns jammed, fuel running down, smoke and fire still carving the sky around him. And somewhere below, in a world, suddenly too big and too silent, Mac was either alive or already gone. Walker pulled up through the chaos, breath shaking, searching for anything left to fight with. The battle wasn't over, but something inside him had changed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.